Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
The deed is done. President Trump nominates Judge Amy Coney Barrett as the justice who would signal a whole new day for the Supreme Court. Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. After years of a tenuous conservative majority on the nation's highest court, President Trump has now made an historic decision in the midst of a bitter election campaign, which promises to give conservatives control of the highest court in the land for years or decades to come. In taking just 1 week to name a replacement for the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg, it was no surprise that Trump selected a woman he long intimated would become his third nominee to the court following Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh. And in Amy Coney Barrett, Trump has delivered a nominee who would turn the court from a fragile 5-4 conservative majority to a 6-3 alignment that all but leaves the progressive wing of the court out in the cold. Judge Barrett has been a rising star on the right, appellate court judge, originalist in the tradition of the late Antonin Scalia.
I clerked for Justice Scalia more than 20 years ago, but the lessons I learned still resonate. His judicial philosophy is mine too. A judge must apply the law as written. Judges are not policymakers, and they must be resolute in setting aside any policy views they might hold.
Judge Barrett, longtime law professor at Notre Dame, devout Catholic, mother of 7, including 2 adopted kids from Haiti, and just 48 years old, promising a long run on the Supreme Court. We'll talk about how we got here and how this appointment is likely to affect the presidential election now some 40 days away.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We kick things off with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out a virtual assembly line of wacky, astonishing, damnable, and ultimately revealing things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. The president's nomination of Judge Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court is now a done deal, but the real drama surrounding the sudden vacancy on the Supreme Court was not so much about who President Trump would nominate to replace the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because any of the 3 to 5 women who made the short list would satisfy the Republican majority and would almost certainly be confirmed if Majority Leader Mitch McConnell could hold 94% of his GOP colleagues, 50 out of 53. No, the true drama is about no less than a seismic shift in the high court, which is now on the near horizon. This is huge, much bigger than getting Neil Gorsuch or Brett Kavanaugh on the court, because those appointments simply tipped an already center-right court somewhat further to the right. This is a game changer. For the left, it's apocalypse now. As they see it, their most precious issues, primarily abortion, will now be endangered to a degree that they haven't been in decades, probably since Earl Warren headed the court as Chief Justice in the 1950s and 60s and led the court heavily to the left. And worse than that, the left has no power to stop it. They tried to beg the few vulnerable or moderate or Trump-hating senators in the GOP, but failed to land enough of them. And then they were reduced to doing what they've done from beginning to end in the Trump era. They threatened, said they'll exact revenge when they regain sufficient power one of these days by packing the court with additional justices sympathetic to the progressive cause, turning territories like Puerto Rico into states so they can add more leftist senators, eliminating the Senate filibuster entirely, and implying through it all that they can just snap their fingers when they regain power in the White House and Senate and make the long-term consequences of their own political misfortunes disappear. In short, because they lost, they will change the rules this country has followed for almost 240 years so it doesn't happen again. But while there was certainly worldwide attention focused on the Supreme Court, the height of drama this week was on Capitol Hill, where a head count of senators on when to bring forward a new justice commenced while Ginsburg's body was still warm. After two of the four senators needed to stop a nomination, Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski publicly opposed going forward before the election. Arguably the most significant moment of the week came from a third Republican senator who's feuded with Trump for years, Mitt Romney, who put Republicans over the top and carefully explained his reasoning.
I've indicated that what I intend to do is to proceed with the consideration process, and if a nominee actually reaches the floor, that I will vote based upon the qualifications of that nominee. You know, I think at this stage it's appropriate to look at the Constitution and to look at the precedent which has existed since the beginning of our country's history. And in a circumstance where a nominee of a president is from a different party than the Senate, then more often than not, the Senate does not confirm. So the Garland decision was consistent with that. On the other hand, when there's a nominee of a party that is in the same party as the Senate, then typically they do confirm. So the Garland decision was consistent with that, and the decision to proceed now with the President Trump's nominee is also consistent with history.
Think of the irony of Mitt Romney, the most outspoken anti-Trump Republican in the Senate, actually clinching Trump the votes he needs to move this game-changing process forward. This twilight struggle over the Supreme Court has caused a tectonic shift, like an earthquake, in the presidential race, where Joe Biden clings to a lead in the polls, but has now seen the biggest issue he's been pressing, the coronavirus, replaced in the headlines by the battle over the court. He came under immediate questioning about whether he would release his own list of potential nominees.
It's a legitimate question, but let me tell you, I'm not going to answer that question because it will shift all the focus. That's what he wants. He never wants to talk about the issue at hand. He always tries to change the subject. But let's say I answer that question. Then the whole debate's going to be, well, Biden said or didn't say. Biden said he would or wouldn't.
Let me translate that for you. He won't release his own list of potential nominees because most of them are liberals or progressives and can only hurt him politically as he tries to continue his high-wire balancing act between being the relatively moderate politician he's been for the better part of 47 years or simply a cipher, a repository for progressives who are actually calling the shots. Now, that last comment from Biden came in another one of those hollow, echoey, isolated settings with Biden wearing a mask so removed from any actual contact with ordinary Americans, I suspect fearful of COVID as well. But that isolation continues to be reflected in head-shaking gaffes that make you wonder about his apparent decline. Like earlier this week when he misstated how many have died from COVID while looking at a teleprompter.
Most cruelly of all, if Donald Trump has his way, the complications from COVID-19, which are well beyond what they should be. It's estimated that 200 million people have died, probably by the time I finish this talk.
Of course, that's over 200,000 who've died with COVID. And by the way, that's an important distinction, people dying with COVID as opposed to from COVID, because the great majority of those who've died were either aging and or had underlying conditions. But with the future of the court now added to the threat of 4 more years of Trump, the left is at DEFCON 1, out on the ledge, threatening to pull out all the stops. And over on CNN, listen to what Don Lemon called for in his conversation with colleague Chris Cuomo.
We're going to have to blow up the entire system. You're going to have to get rid of the Electoral College because the people...
I don't see it.
Because the minority in this country decides who the judges are and they decide who the president is.
But you need a constitutional amendment to do that.
And if Joe Biden wins, Democrats can stack the courts.
We didn't get our way. Ruth Bader Ginsburg died at the wrong time. The country voted the wrong way in 2016, so let's just blow up the system. So, what say we take a breath and take a step back in time? Because with all the civil unrest and the pandemic and now a battle for the ages over the Supreme Court, there's a tendency to think things have never been this bad and wonder whether we'll get through all this. We'll tell you why history reveals that there's actually nothing new under the sun when we return.
Extra, read all about it.
Election 2020 Big Bottom Flash Reports are coming. On election night, at the bottom of every hour, LibertyNation.com will give you Election Night 2020, 90 seconds at a time, with our Big Bottom Flash Reports. You'll get the drop with our one-stop shop. Tune into LibertyNation.com on election night for our Big Bottom Flash Reports, at the bottom of every hour. LibertyNation.com.